And hello everyone, Mike Martinego of SportMedBC here. We're so glad you could join us for our second SportMed Safety Webinar of 2014. We'll be doing a series of 8 webinars, and this is the second one of the series, as mentioned, taking us through to early 2015. Last month we kicked things off with one on shoulder injuries, and tonight we'll be talking about hydration for sport. Just before I throw it over to our Manager of Sports Safety and Event Services, Paul Dwyer, I do want to mention if you have any questions or comments, any feedback throughout, we'll try our best to answer to it during the webinar. There's a toolbar on the right-hand side that allows you to send us questions and comments. As well, this webinar will be posted in our safety network and our YouTube channel, as well as SportMedBC.com within the next 24 to 48 hours. So be sure to sign up for the free network and log on to SportMedBC.com as well to check out the webinar one more time in case you missed any information. For now, I'll pass it over to our Manager of Sports Safety and Event Services, Paul Dwyer, and Paul will take us through best practices, hydration for sport.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike, and thank you to everybody who's joining us here this evening for our webinar on hydration for sport. As Mike said, my name is Paul Dwyer. I am the Manager of Sports Safety and Event Services with SportMedBC. And my background is as a certified athletic therapist and certified strength and conditioning specialist. So looking at the presentation for this evening, we are going to go over specifically the importance of water to an athlete and looking at dehydration and some recommendations for the uses of water. And lastly, we'll get into monitoring your hydration and looking at sports drinks versus the use of specifically water. So the importance of water. Obviously, water is one of the most vital and abundant substances within our bodies. It makes up, depending on the individual, as much as 60 to 75% of your total body weight. It's essential to all your chemical processes in the body, and all the body systems depend completely on an adequate balance of water and able to function. Without water in our daily lives, we simply would not be able to survive. From a sporting perspective, it helps us to cool our bodies, it helps circulate our blood, nourish our tissues, and as you can see here, water makes up a huge component, a high percentage of our muscle tissue, our brain matter, our blood, our kidneys, and of course our connective tissue. So very, very vital to sport. As I mentioned, water is necessary for all of our cellular processes and metabolic reactions. Without it, we simply cease to function. It helps us to transport nutrients and removes waste at a cellular as well as a macro level, of course. It helps us carry our nutrients and oxygen in blood, and it's vital in terms of protecting our organs, and of course it's essential for respiration. The ways in which water facilitates our body's operations are pretty much endless, and as I said, life can simply not be maintained without it. Looking at the body's water volume, as I mentioned, our total body volume is as much as 60 to 75% of our total body weight. So if we're looking at a 150-pound athlete or individual, water can make up as much as 90 to 110 pounds or 40 to 50 kilograms of your body weight. Water is divided into what's called your intracellular fluid. So this is the water that's maintained within your cells, and your extracellular fluid. So that makes up 20% of the body weight. And this is divided into your interstitial fluid volume and your plasma volume related to your blood. Now, the average adult can go through an input and output of approximately 2.5 liters of water per day. So this is looking at the balance between water gained and the water lost throughout the average day. Now, the average adult may experience as much as 2.5 liters. This will vary depending on, of course, age, the environment, your lifestyle, and just the status of your hydration overall. Now, it's important to look at water gained. We do this not only through the beverages that we drink, but also in the food we eat. Solid foods contain water content as well. Our other way of gaining water is simply through metabolic processes in the body. It's a small amount, but it's still there. Water is lost in a number of different ways. The main way that we eliminate water is through our urine, through our kidneys, and also through our feces to a lesser extent. Also, respiration is a minor component to how we lose water. And lastly, of course, perspiration, and this is through our sweating mechanism and through our skin surface. The body has an incredible capacity to cool our core temperature through perspiration. So sweating allows us to cool through the evaporation of sweat at the skin surface. Even though this process is absolutely vital, if we don't replace these fluids, we can become severely dehydrated. So obviously, this is a huge component of keeping track of your hydration, is keeping an eye on your perspiration. Now, as I mentioned, the processes by which our bodies regulate internal fluid levels, they're complex to say the least and amazing. We're incredibly efficient at regulating fluid levels and the balance of our electrolytes. We have internal systems that can detect both fluid volume and the concentration of electrolytes. We also have basically an internal thirst mechanism that recognizes the need for us to drink. It's mainly the hypothalamus in our brains, the pituitary gland, and the kidneys that help to regulate these processes. Obviously, this is why if we have kidney failure, it's an extreme danger to have. So it's imperative that as athletes, as coaches, as parents, that we have a good understanding and that we recognize the signs and the symptoms of dehydration. I've listed a bunch here as obviously thirst and dry mouth, but then as this progresses, it can turn into weakness, fatigue, headache, dizziness, chills. Naturally, our performance will start to decrease, not only mentally but physically. Athletes might exhibit confusion, irritability, of course, decreased output of urine, decreased sweat production. If it progresses to a bad state, we can get into situations where athletes might vomit, feel nausea, and even heart palpitations. This is particularly important to recognize when we're in hot, humid weather, or of course when an athlete is already partially dehydrated. These symptoms can really progress quite quickly, and if not addressed, can lead to more serious conditions related to heat exertion, including heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. If we are sure that we engage in proper hydration, not only during our play and after, but beforehand, we can help to manage these symptoms and ensure that we're not going to have any of these heat-related illnesses. So dehydration obviously affects performance a lot. When we're looking at dehydration, essentially what we're looking at is when our water output exceeds our water input, so there's an imbalance. One of the main ways to recognize this is to look at the percentage of our body weight lost in terms of fluid lost either through perspiration, respiration, and through urine. So when we're looking at performance indicators, when the body loses as much as 1 to 2% of body weight, we already start to feel a decrease in performance. Okay? We should always have a goal within our sport to not lose any more than 1 to 2% of our body weight. So really important to monitor. You'll see some of the effects here. With 1 to 2%, obviously you feel thirst, but fatigue, weakness, discomfort, loss of appetite will affect an athlete immediately. With 3 to 4%, you'll start to have impaired physical performance, dry mouth, reduction in urine, flushed skin, irritability, and then progressively these symptoms start to get worse with confusion, headache, irritability. Sleep can be affected, increased respiratory rate, which can be extremely dangerous for an athlete that's competing in hot weather and at a high intensity level already. And this is especially exacerbated by, for young kids that experience these as well. Losses of 7 to 10% of body weight can be a really, really dangerous situation, which might require hospitalization. So in order to monitor our hydration, one of the best ways, as I mentioned, is to look at your body weight. It's important to measure the body weight before and after competition. As I said, we want to have a goal of not losing any more than 2% of our body weight during competition. Athletes that are competing at a really high level within hot temperatures and endurance level events, athletes can lose this much weight within an hour and even more with higher levels of humidity and perspiration. The other best way for an athlete to monitor their own hydration status is to be familiar with your urine color and quantity. What we're looking for with the chart on the side obviously is a clear, copious amount of urine. And what's most important is that the athlete recognizes their own signs and what is normal for them. Keep in mind medications and some supplements can affect the color of our urine. And one of the most important things is with monitoring your hydration is not letting thirst be your guide. Once you feel thirst, you're already dehydrated. So there are a number of recommendations that come from a number of organizations, including the Canadian Athletic Therapy Society Association and the Canadian Pediatric Association. What you're looking for with hydration, obviously, is allowing time for the body to absorb and regulate fluid volume. You want to allow time to replenish during play, and if you're in a sport where there aren't opportunities to replenish on a regular basis, such as soccer, long-distance running, you want to make sure that you plan accordingly. It's important to also monitor how much fluid's been lost after competition to understand how much should be consumed to replenish. So some of the indicators here are prior to competition, including 400 to 600 milliliters of water. This gives you ample time to hydrate before competition. 200 to 300 milliliters of water or sports drink 10 to 20 minutes before competition is recommended, and 200 to 300 milliliters of water or sports drink each 10 to 20 minutes during competition. Lastly, after competition, within the first hour to 2 hours, you want to replenish with 500 to 600 milliliters of water or sports drink. Recommendations made from the American College of Sports Medicine and the Canadian Pediatric Society are based on recommendations that children rehydrate with 13 milliliters of water or fluid per kilogram of body weight per hour of competition and 4 milliliters per kilogram of body weight after competition. So there's always a question about whether to drink water or whether to drink sports drinks. So water is obviously the most important fluid that we can drink. In moderate levels of activity, water is your go-to source. For activities under 90 minutes that aren't high intensity, again, water is your best source. But this is important to include with a balanced diet, including carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals. Through our sweat process, we'll lose a lot of the necessary minerals and vitamins, so we want to make sure that we're getting an adequate diet that replaces these vital minerals to the body. Sports drinks are more appropriate for higher levels of intensity, greater than 40 minutes, endurance level events where excessive sweating and hot temperatures can cause us to lose electrolytes or those important minerals in the body. We'll also lose a lot of carbohydrates with high energy expenditure, so we're looking to replace sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. Unfortunately, the way that sports drinks and, of course, energy drinks are marketed, the audience is often youth or adolescent children. Sports drinks absolutely have their place, and they can benefit the athlete in hydrating. The concern is that these sports drinks are often consumed in place of water when it's not necessary. So looking specifically at sports drinks, the sports drink is designed to help replenish electrolytes lost through sweating. So they contain carbohydrates, minerals, and those electrolytes I mentioned, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. We can divide these sport drinks into 3 different types. Isotonic sport drinks that have a percentage of 6 to 8% carbohydrates. They include electrolytes and sugar, and this is your Gatorades and your Powerades. A hypotonic solution will have fewer than 8% carbohydrates. It'll include minerals, vitamins, and fewer calories typically. So this is your vitamin water, Propel. And then a hypertonic solution is your recovery drink, greater than 8% carbohydrates, includes electrolytes, sugar, and proteins a lot of the time to replenish muscle tissue after sport. Frequent consumption of sports drinks can be detrimental to childhood growth and development by impeding the appropriate levels of carbohydrates and proteins and fats in the diet. Without an adequate level of activity and subsequent fluid loss, young people may be ingesting far more calories than are necessary, and this often comes in the form of sugars, and these sugars aren't used for energy, then they can be converted into fat. So a lot of the times with youth and sports drinks, when we're using these sport drinks as a substitute for water, you can run into problems of childhood obesity, type 2 diabetes, and naturally dental decay as well. So they definitely need to have their place. By all means, they're a great product for helping to replenish those lost fluids and electrolytes, but they need to be associated with sport. So as I said, it's not a substitute for water in everyday life. The excessive caloric intake is really dangerous for children. Like I said, it has a purpose and it should be used as such. So I want to talk briefly about fluids to avoid. One of the biggest ones, energy drinks that we'll talk about, caffeine, soft drinks, carbonated drinks, and of course alcohol. So energy drinks. Again, energy drinks are really targeted towards a young population, and unfortunately they're consumed often in place of fluids that are healthy for us. The energy often comes not only in the form of caffeine, but other stimulants as well. Drank in excess, these can increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, increase body temperature, and spike blood sugar. For an athlete that's competing in a high-intensity sport, especially with high temperatures, this can be really detrimental. Children typically have a higher heart rate as is, so increasing heart rate for a child in a hot temperature is very dangerous. Secondly, you want to avoid coffee and the caffeine associated with such. Coffee can be an irritator of your GI tract, and coffee can also cause you to decrease your fluid retention and increase your urine output. So it acts as a diuretic. So it sort of alters your ability to retain fluid as you normally would. You want to avoid soft drinks. Soft drinks have a higher sugar content, so in terms of energy level, you can get a spike of energy quickly and then quickly fall back down from that spike in energy. Similarly, the carbonation, along with other carbonated drinks, can cause GI irritation or gastrointestinal irritation, and it also, because of the carbonation, can reduce your voluntary intake of fluids. You'll get that feeling that you're really full and bloated, and it'll cut down on your ability to ingest the necessary fluids that you need to stay hydrated during your sport. And lastly, of course, you want to avoid alcohol. Alcohol impedes your cognitive and physical function, but it also impedes your normal kidney function. It'll, again, increase your urine output, but decrease your fluid retention. So lastly, I want to leave you with a few tips for hydration in sport. One of the most important things you can do is prepare for your activity. Know the length of your matches, know the number of competitions you have close together, and plan ahead. You want to make sure that you come into your sport hydrated already. Drink early, drink during, drink after, and drink often. Really important. One of the best things you can do as a parent, as a coach, is make sure that your athletes and your kids carry a water bottle with them. This is going to ensure that they're not having to go out and buy unnecessary sports and energy drinks. Another way to help athletes to ingest the water that is necessary for their sport is to come with your water bottles chilled before games, before practices. One of the good things you can do with a bottle of water is put it in the freezer. When you come to it at halftime, you've got a nice icy cold bottle of water, and that'll influence people to want to drink more. Always replace fluids that you've lost, especially on hot and humid days. We lose more water through perspiration on these hot and humid days, so it's very vital that you choose the appropriate drinks to replace those fluids. As a coach and as an athlete, you must make time for hydration. Coaches should make sure that they embed time for water breaks within their practices, as well as give athletes a chance for a timeout during a game to get replenished in terms of water. Do not wait until later to get hydrated. As I said, when the thirst mechanism kicks in, you're already dehydrated. And lastly, monitor your own hydration. Have a plan for yourself. Monitor your weight, monitor your urine color and output, and know what works for you. Make sure that you choose the right fluids to replenish with and have a balanced diet that'll help also replenish the nutrients needed. Thanks very much for attending the webinar. As I said, my name is Paul Dwyer. I'm the Manager of Sport Safety and Event Services. Thanks for joining us for this webinar, and we hope you can join us again for ones in the future. I'm going to pass you back to Mike.
Great stuff, Paul. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, passing along their thoughts. Again, for various tools and tips and resources, information on courses, be sure to visit SportMedBC.com. The webinar, like I said before, will be posted online within the next 24 to 48 hours, and that, again, is on SportMedBC.com. Paul mentioned how to connect with him. For more from SportMedBC, there are the particular social media channels. You can visit us, youtube.com/SportMedBC, Facebook.com/SportMedBC, and Twitter.com/SportMedBC. Our next webinar in a month's time. Stay tuned for details, and be sure to check back for information and updates through those various social media channels. For Paul Dwyer, I'm Mike Martinego. Thanks again for checking out this SportMed Safety webinar.